G'day everyone, welcome to another episode of the Purple Coloured Glasses. You might have noticed I didn't put a video out this week about my tips because I wanted to do a bit of a mid-season review about Freo and how they've been going so far this year. I'll be going through all the players, giving my assessment of how they've gone and also more broadly how the team's been tracking. So far we're sitting at a 10-3 record with a percentage just under 130%. We've got the second best defence in the league. We've only conceded 2 more points than Melbourne, who are number 1 defence. And I think as a whole, we've looked a lot more cohesive, and Justin Longmuir's game plan's really embedding with the team. And some of our younger players and players around the fringes have really taken the next step. So I'll just start a little bit about the coaching groups. I think Justin Longmuir has been a really good addition. It was a bit of a gamble to sack Ross Lyon and bring in Justin. Ross was an established coach, but he did have some blind spots, I think, particularly around things like skill level. He did bring a lot of discipline to the club, and always grateful for taking us to our first grand final. And it was a bit of a bold move by the board and Peter Bell to turn over quite a bit of the staff in that stage. So a lot of the assistant coaches have changed as well. I think Jamie Graham's been a great addition to the group in the panel that's been assembled over the last couple of years. And our forward line does look a bit more dangerous. I still think there's room for improvement in our forward line. It probably is our weakest line. But our defence looks really solid, and our midfield continues to grow. And our midfield's got still a lot of young players in terms of games experience. We've been putting out one of the youngest sides all year. So I think the coaches are doing very well at half-time to turn the team around. There's been a few games this year where we've been down at half-time, and whatever's being said or whatever tactical adjustments are being made, or the combination of those things is really working. And that's great to see, and that can only be effective if the coaches have got good relationships with the players and have formed a connection over the last couple of years. So I think it's been, in hindsight, probably good. We had to go into hubs, and these players spend a bit more time with each other, and the coaches spend a bit more time with the players than they probably would in normal circumstances. And it may be something we reflect back on in a couple of, even further down the track, where it was a really key bonding moment for this group and bringing them all together. So now I'm just going to talk about each line, and I'll be talking about each player, how I think they've been going, and we'll be starting from the back line. I'll talk mainly about the first team players, and I'll touch on some of the guys that are playing reserves, but it'll be more sort of second-hand information because I've only watched maybe 2 or 3 Peel games, and I haven't watched the whole thing, the sort of just snippets of those. So just a bit of hearsay on those players. So start with down back. And I will start with Griffin Logue. So I'll talk about him here and in the forward section. But when he's played down back this year, at times we have looked a bit too tall. So when we've played Logue, Pearce and Cox. But there have been some sides it's worked quite well against. So when we played against Carlton, he played on Charlie Curnow and absolutely dominated him. He has the athleticism to keep up with Charlie. Couldn't really work up the ground and get easy possessions, and that was his best defensive game by far this year. He's added a lot up forward. He's a good player in terms of his attributes to be playing Peel. So if he was playing lots of games down at Peel, you probably think that's a bit of a waste in sort of the key position stock. So I'm glad they sort of figured out a way to keep him in the side and play up forward. But in terms of our ground balance, I felt we didn't really have that sort of really good small matchup or that ground level support type player that Brandon Walker's offered when he's come into the side. So I think just for a team balance perspective, it looks like they've sorted that out. And I guess maybe while we're just on Logue as well, I think his forward work's been quite good. I think he needs to get a bit more ruthless in front of goal and take some opportunities. But he's setting up a lot for the team so far, and it's still really early days. So it'd be interesting to see how his career progresses, and it's always useful to have a swingman in the team. You never know what happens it might be during a big final. Touch wood, it doesn't happen, but maybe one of our key backs actually gets an injury, and if you can put someone like Griffin Logue back in the back line to clamp down on someone like a Tom Hawkins or a Max King who's going crazy, and you just wouldn't have the right size matchup. That's what he offers. So it's great to be for him to be a bit flexible and versatile and keep him in the side. Luke Ryan. Luke Ryan has been an absolute bastion of stability in the side. He hasn't had that freakish sort of standout year when he won All Australian, essentially because every defender was injured and there was a lot of pressure on him, and he delivered, and he was playing undersized on a lot of players. I think he's really important to our structure. He provides a very consistent level of performance each and every week. I think he helps Marshall organise the team, and I think he flies the flag really well for like the team pride. Like if there's any sort of scuffle, like he's there to fly the flag and stand up for the other boys on the team, and that's what I really love about Luke Ryan. He doesn't let some of the younger players get bullied, and he's still quite a young player himself. He's 26. He was drafted as a mature ager. He's one of those few players who's actually in that middle age bracket, and he does really look after the guys on the team, and I love him. He's courageous. He goes back with the flight. He puts himself in hard positions. He never shirks a contest. He's a great mark. He's a great kick. And he's almost at 100 games, and they've really flown by, and it's been great having him in the team. So Nathan Wilson, he hasn't played many games. I don't think he's played any games this year. He was in the side leading in through pre-season. It was maybe between him and Jordan Clark about who would sort of get that run and carry type of position off halfback. And I think he sort of had the front running, probably as the senior player that was maybe the only reason he was marginally in front. He put a decent amount of work on the training track leading in, and I think he was probably going to get the first bite of the cherry, but unfortunately he copped an injury in the pre-season. I think it was a shoulder, and he just hasn't been able to get back in the side. I think Jordan Clark's offers a lot more than he does, but you never know. It's good to have players like Nathan Wilson. He's stuck on 149 games. He might have to come in right at the back end of the season. You never know what happens, and it can be good to have that depth. Similar with Ethan Hughes, the next on this list. So Ethan Hughes has played the last couple of games with Heath Chapman being out injured. In terms of what he offers to the team, I don't think he is as skillful as Chappie. But he's hard at it. He doesn't give up. He's a very physical body. I feel like he can lose his man occasionally. He can't necessarily pull off those laser kicks through the middle. So we really use Chapman and Young to set up our attacks. Ethan Hughes can't necessarily be used in the same way. But he still offers a lot as just a solid player. He can be a good defender. He puts his body on the line in the contests, and you can't really ask much more from these players that are probably on your 23 to 26 on the list. Like, they're the depth defenders you've got, and you know if something does happen, you can put them in the side. And he hasn't embarrassed himself. He's been really solid in the couple of games he's played. Joel Hamling. So it's been good to see Hamling get back on the field. Similar to Alex Pearce, he's had a run of chronic injuries, I think with his ankle, foot region, and I didn't really think he'd walk back into the team. He's been a really good player outside those injuries, but he's only played 87 games, and he's 29 now, and he's the sort of player that the Western Bulldogs could actually use a lot. They don't really have any key position players, and they traded him to us a few years ago, and he was really good during those couple of years when a lot of the guys were playing. They were turning over the list and rebuilding. In the waffle, he's been solid. He's had a few guys kick bags on him, but he looks like he's got quite decent knee soreness. That's probably holding him back. I think for him personally, just get through the year, just rehabilitate yourself, get used to playing footy again, and you never know with some of our tools. They might get injured. He has to come in for a couple of finals or next year if we need him. So no issues with him being on the list, and I still think he's trying to get more confidence back in his body. Alex Pearce. Pearce has been really solid. One, I've just been happy if he gets through the whole year and plays almost every game and doesn't get a serious injury. He's had so many serious injuries that have really set him back, and I'd just be pleased for him if he gets through. He's been really solid in terms of locking down opposition key forwards. He probably doesn't rack the stats up like some key position backs, so he's not really talked about in terms of all Australian conversations. He's sort of on the fringe behind guys like Stephen May and James Sicily, but I still think he offers a lot. He's clean enough with the ball. He's got good closing speed, and really outside of Max King going crazy for 5 minutes and kicking 3 or 4 goals on him in that game against St Kilda, no one's really got a hold of Alex Pearce. He's been really solid. And that's the sort of guy you want. It's 200 odd centimetres, just play on the opposition team's best forward and keep them to 1 or 2 goals. Keep a couple of guys to a duck here or there, and occasionally an opposition player is going to get a hold of you. So if we look at maybe Max King beat him, so out of 13 games, he's only lost once. So it's been a pretty solid year from Alex Pearce. Hayden Young. Hayden Young is our future, really. Him and Heath Chapman, the next player I'll talk about. So both Young and Chappie, very similar types of players, and the roles they play in the team. They're the intercepting halfbacks that the team are sort of directed to give the ball to these blokes and look for absolute laser passes through the middle of the ground and cut teams up. Hayden Young has got he reads the game really well, gets in a great position. Watching at the ground, he's not the fastest player, but he seems to always be in good position. And to me, that means he reads the game really well. He sort of can see a couple of kicks ahead what's going to happen. Really courageous, goes back with the flight of the ball, puts himself in the hole. And this thing I really like about both him and Chappie is they're courageous players and they try to mark the ball. Previously, we've had some defenders who are maybe a bit more negative. They'll just try to spoil it. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. In previous areas, you're trying to limit the scoring. But this game style is really like when a team's attacking, if we can take a mark in a good position, let's hit them going the other way, catch them on transition. And Heath Chapman, he's missed the last couple of games due to a hamstring injury. Hopefully, it doesn't sound like it's too serious. He'll be back in a couple of weeks. But magnificent spoil in our first game to prevent the goal and get us a 1-point win. He's been really solid as well. The only thing I could say about both Chappie and Youngie is maybe a bit more accountability on some of their players when they're playing on them. But I think they are given a bit of a license to attack. And what I like about both of them is they'll occasionally make a mistake where they kick the ball inside and it's a horrible turnover and we get scored against. And most of the time, they've got the courage to just keep doing it because we're generating a lot of scores from that. So it's good that they can just put that moment aside, back their skills in, and just go for it again. And they're both really young players, and really excited for them to be part of our team for the next 10 odd years. Brandon Walker. So I really love Brandon Walker. He's fast, zippy. He plays an accountable style. And he's played on some decent opponents. So played on Charlie Cameron. He did reasonably well against him. I think Charlie Cameron got a couple of easy goals, sort of out the back or from a free kick. So they're not necessarily against Brandon. And I've seen there was a couple of contests I saw with Ethan Hughes against Bruce. I think it might have been in that Hawthorn game where Hughes was a bit clumsy and gave away a free kick, where Brandon Walker seems to be able to put his body in the right position, make it look like he's contesting the ball fairly, and not give away some of those free kicks. And some of those crafty small forwards, they've got that in their kit bag, is how to draw a free kick. I still think there's a bit to work on in terms of some of that body positioning and really holding those small forwards at bay. And I think some of his ball use could improve in terms of his kicking. But I think he's quite clean, so good hands in terms of picking the ball up, hand passing it to people. But he doesn't really have the kicking skills that Hayden Young and Heath Chapman do. He has the courage to take the kick on and try, which is a positive. So I think if he just keeps playing with the team, he gets a few more games under his belt, a few more seasons. Still quite young as well. He's still only 19 from our NGA Academy. Or NGA, and yeah, see a really bright future for him. And he's a quick, zippy player down back, which helps balance out some of the other guys who they're reasonable pace, not slow, but they're not rapid like he is. Brennan Cox, I reckon he's been our best defender this year. The sheer volume of intercept marks. He's typically playing on the second tall, and he just seems to be able to roll off, read the contest early and get in the way. And he doesn't do it like Jeremy McGovern where he's jumping on blokes' heads. He's more seeing, okay, where the gap is, and he just floats in front of the contest and takes the mark. Been very solid this year. Very clean disposal. He doesn't necessarily take on some of the outrageous aggressive kicks like Heath Chapman or Hayden Young, but he's very clean with those chips around the back line. Get it to one of those types of players so they can do the damage. He plays his role really well. He still has occasional sort of brain fart moments. Like there was the one against Hawthorn, I think, where it was unexpected. He just thought a free kick was being paid, like Alex Pearce being pushed in the back, and he's just like thrown the ball back, and the Hawthorn bloke has kicked it. It might have been in the Brisbane game, but yeah, you got to play to the whistle, Brennan. But he just has some of those occasional moments. But he's probably been our best defender this year, I'd say. And then Jordan Clark, I think, has been a really good acquisition from Geelong. He's put position some pressure on Nathan Wilson in that run and carry type role. And you know, he's owned the position this year. I think he's been solid. He has made a couple of mistakes, but he adds a lot of enthusiasm. He you know, despite making mistakes, he'll try again. He applies some physical pressure, and he doesn't mind getting a bit rough on tumble. So it's good to have some feistiness in the team, some combative nature. And yeah, I've really enjoyed having him part of the team so far. So that's all the defenders on the list. I'll now move on to the midfield. And first one on the list is Carl Warner. So Carl Warner was picked up in the rookie draft. He was over in Victoria. I don't think he's played much footy over the last couple of years. He's a winger, and it's just been good to get him over and playing in Peel and playing games every week. He needs a bit of time to develop. He's behind a few other blokes who are in the wing position, and the wing was something that was flagged at the start of the year as something where we needed a bit more depth. Wasn't a position anyone had really nailed down, and what we've seen this year is there have been quite a few players who really want to stake a claim on that wing position. We've seen some really strong performances this year. James Aish. Aish is one of the fan favourite players, I think. He's not like the absolute superstar, but he's one of those guys that just tries his heart out every single week. You know, rolling out with the long sleeves. He's played down back. He's played in the midfield in centre clearances. He's tagged. He's played on the wing. There's an occasional rotation through half forward. James Aish is the Mr. Fix-It for the coaching group. If there's something that they need done, someone gets injured, they know they can reliably put James Aish there to help plug a gap. And it's useful to have a couple of players like this on the list where it doesn't really seem to upset their rhythm too much in terms of if they're not played in their ideal position, you suddenly have a massive drop off. He's a great team man. He sacrifices aspects of his game. There's been games where he's racked up 30 touches and he's got 700 meters gained, and that's a great personal game for him when he's racking up those sort of statistics. But then he'll play a more accountable defensive type role, and he doesn't chuck a fuss. He doesn't sook about it. He just gets on and does it. So great team man, James Aish. Darcy Tucker. So Tucker's someone I've probably been a bit critical of. I think he can really be contributing more to this team. He's in that sort of peak period in terms of like when he was drafted. He's had quite a few pre-seasons now. He has been crawled a little bit with serious hamstring injuries over the last couple of years, and I think that has impacted his conditioning and getting through a pre-season and just hitting the ground running. And now he's finding it a bit hard to establish himself in the team, whether that's on the wing, off half back, in the centre, off a half forward. And I think for him, he does need a bit of consistency. So compared to someone like James Aish, I think he needs to try lock down a position and find where's best for him. And he's probably someone who's looking over his shoulder a little bit. So you've got Caleb Sarong and Brayshaw really locked in those midfield positions. Will Brodie's come in as that inside player, so it doesn't really look like there's any inside roles for him. So then he's got to look at a wing, and there's some other guys that have probably gone past him a little bit. And then you've got some of the younger midfielders we've drafted as well. So Carl Warner, you've got Erasmus that we've drafted, and Johnson as well. And in the future, do you look at moving Chapman and Young into wing positions or into the midfield? So he does need to take his game to the next level, or he might find himself squeezed out of the team and very hard for him to get back in. And he's really sort of floating around the sub first person drop type of role when he hasn't been injured this year. Nathan O'Driscoll, haven't really seen much of him over the last couple of years. He's really just building the body a bit. I think he was injured when he got drafted by Fremantle, had a real limited pre-season, and I think they would have wanted to give him some games if he'd been in a good enough physical condition prior to this year. When he's come in, he's shown a lot of feistiness, a lot of run, very attacking type player, and just seems like someone who believes in himself and just gives it a go. And it was almost upsetting to hear that he was had a foot hot spot, sort of like a fracture in the foot or something like that. They're saying, and he's still going to be out for another 4 weeks, I think they said, or another 4 weeks before it can be scanned again. So he's almost done for the year, I'd say. So he's got a good taste of it. Definitely the future, and he's someone who's putting some real pressure on that wing position. Loves kicking him from the pockets. It's good to have those midfielders that chip in with goals. Jai Amos. So this is, I don't know why he's listed as a midfielder here. So I might move past these guys and come back. So Neil Erasmus. He's had 5 games this year. I think 2 were as a sub. One of our first round picks from last season, or the end of last season. Looks like a really good player. Just needs some time to build up the body size and shape. And I think work on just his tank so he can run games out. When he does look like he gets near the ball, he looks very classy, like clean hands, good disposal, and once he just plays a bit more footy, he'll be really good for us moving forward. Matt Johnson, he should have been a first rounder, actually slid to the second round and we picked him up. Was very highly rated. Has only started playing waffle in the last couple of weeks due to a foot injury he's had. Depending on how we're going, he may not get a game this year. I think Erasmus would have played more this year, for example, if we weren't going so well and we just wanted to expose more of the list. But we've been going really well and very minimal injuries as well. Johnson is someone I could see they give a game at the end of the year if our ladder position couldn't change or something like that. Other than that, I think we're just going to build up some of these younger guys in the reserves, and I think that's a good thing to do sometimes. It can be a bit tough on some of these players. They come into the AFL and there's a lot of expectations on them to hit the ground running straight away. You look at someone like Horn Francis at North Melbourne. He was an absolute dominant player at the level below, and now he's coming in. He's finding it quite challenging. There's opposition teams that are really targeting him because he's the number one player, and there's not other midfielders who are really standing up. So you do get to protect and nurture and develop some of these younger players as they're coming through, and there's nothing wrong with doing that through the waffle. It's a decent level of competition, particularly at their age, and they haven't built up the body frame and the fitness levels yet. Connor Blakely. So Connor was someone maybe a couple of years ago people were talking about when Lachie Neale left, he was going to replace him, and he's probably one of the main victims of Longmuir's standards in terms of skill level. Connor knows how to find the ball, and he can rack up the possessions, but he can absolutely butcher it when he gets it, and I think that's why he's finding himself pretty consistently down at Peel. Often the best midfielder listed, and same thing, he racks it up, but if, a lot of the reports I'm seeing say he still needs to work on his disposal a bit. And there's no reason why he couldn't improve his disposal, but he's one of the he's in that sort of middle-age bracket, same age as Darcy Tucker. Starts to find himself on the outer. We've drafted in some higher-rated draft picks who've got a bit more skill than him, or are projected to. And so he may find himself sort of out of the side or even delisted in the next couple of years, if unless something changes. He's currently on the rookie list, so it's a bit easier for Fremantle if they do want to delist him moving forward. Caleb Sarong. So Sarong's been really solid this year. I thought he started a bit slow in terms of his output compared to previous seasons. And I'm being really tough on a bloke who's not even played 50 games yet. He's just set a really high standard for himself. He's an awesome player. I love Caleb Sarong. But in the last couple of weeks, he just seems like he's being a bit more explosive from the contest. I felt like he was just getting the ball and whacking it on the boot and getting it forward. He seems to be getting the ball from one of the other midfielders now, or from the tap, and running out of the contest past a few players and then driving a deep kick forward to a target rather than sort of just blindly kicking it. Still a lot of upside for Caleb Sarong. He's a great player, strong leader, leads good standards. And yeah, I think between him and Brayshaw, they've been really key to our leadership and driving up the ladder in terms of the standards they've set in the off-season, doing extra training when they don't need to, getting the boys together, and really bringing everyone on the journey. Andrew Brayshaw, yeah, also solid, but probably been our best player this year so far. And it's just, he's the complete midfielder in terms of, like, he does everything really well. There are some other midfielders that do things better than him, so I'd say there's midfielders that mark better than him, that kick goals, that are better at clearances, better at meters gained, better at contested possessions, but he has the best balance of all those features. So he's a very accountable midfielder. He runs both ways, and so does Sarong. They're both very accountable midfielders. So Brayshaw runs both ways. He works inside the contest. He can get contested possessions and go head-to-head with someone. He can go on the outside of the contest. He's often that linking player, so if we're finding it hard to get a kick down the line, he's someone who'll present at that 45-metre angle, the 45 kick for the defenders, just to try slow the game down and let everyone else get into position. He's a good link-up type player like that. He can go forward and create pressure and kick a goal. He's been a bit better in front of goals than he's been previously. And he just looks like someone that drives standards and really gets around the boys and leads them forward. And it's good to have more leaders in the team. You don't necessarily need to have the little C next to your name as the captain. You want as many leaders without a title in your team. And I think Andrew Brayshaw has been immense this year. Another really solid player this year. And I think if they actually picked all Australian teams correctly based on positions, this guy would have the wing position locked down with Ed Langdon from Melbourne, and that's Blake Acres. And Acres is probably one of those whipping boy type players. Really big body, solid game, not so solid game, solid game, not so solid game. He could be a bit frustrating, but this year he has come out like a house on fire. He has played very well in the wing position. It was a real shame to see him go down with a hamstring injury. That game against Geelong was the best game I've seen from a winger in a long time in terms of the ground he was covering defensively, the amount of pressure he was putting on the possessions he was winning and driving the ball forward, and that goal he kicked was awesome. So I think he's got a good future around the team, and I think this sort of pressure for the wing position, it's good to see a few players sort of come out and go, I want that to be my position. So pretty happy for Blake, and hopefully he gets back on the field shortly. David Mundy. David Mundy, the rising star, he's been fantastic, and there have been some moments, I think, where he's lack of pace is starting to show. A few blokes running off him. But I think for the most part, they've looked after him. They've managed his time on ground. He's done a little bit less than everyone else. They've managed him through the year. I think with Fife coming back, they can probably look at a couple of games just not playing him or using him as the medi-sub to get him through. He's still got a really lethal disposal into our forward line. He's still one of our best kicks with that, and really happy for David to play on another year. Push for that Monday 400. Will Brodie. Will Brodie has been like the recruit of the year. We somehow got him as part of a salary dump and the draft pick that netted us Matt Johnson. Been really happy with Will Brodie's work. I think it's more just being part of an environment that really wants him, fits our team structure, and I think this is another credit to the coaching. I heard some comments from Stewie Dew. It's like, yeah, we've got these other midfielders, so and they're doing quite well. So how's Will Brodie going to push him out? And that might work for Gold Coast moving forward. But if you look at our team, it's like, well, we've got these big bodies in Fife and Mundy, and Sarong and Brayshaw. They throw themselves around physically, but they're not as big. And I think Will Brodie's just a little bit bigger, and he's doing the in and under work, and he's getting the ball out to guys like Sarong and Brayshaw to do the damage. And it's been good to be able to balance that load. So I think our coaches have really looked at the value Will Brodie could add to the team, and they've really made that dynamic work, rather than looking at his flaws and what he doesn't do so well. So there's been some knocks, I think, on his tank, which I think is something he can develop himself, and his kicking. And I think his kicking's been quite decent, actually. And it's more around he doesn't take kicks on that are sort of outside his capabilities. I think he knows what his limitations are. I think that's part of being a real smart player, is playing within your limitations. Sometimes you know you're not a good kick and you just go for some of these superhero kicks. So yeah, I think he plays well within his limitations. Nat Fife, so he's come back for one game. It's been a solid one game. Can't comment too much on him. The boys have got it done without him pretty much. And it'll be good to see how we go for the rest of the year when he's back in the side. Luke Valenti. So Luke Valenti retired at the start of the year, and I think he's gone back to Adelaide. I was unfortunate to not see him run around in purple, but yeah, a lot of chronic injuries. And I think that was it for midfielders. So I'll just touch on rucks. So Sean Darcy. Sean Darcy has been really solid. He's had a couple of games where he's really dominated. But I still think he can go another level. I think he's had some more dominant games last year. I think for him, a bit of consistency, just getting out there each and every week. Sometimes to sort of get 4 or 5 games together, miss a game, and a bit of it this year, I think, was one he had H&S protocols, and I think there's been a game or two, it's been sort of rumoured he had the flu or something, but played anyway. There's been some games where he's got forward and really contributed, and there's been some times we've been down and out and he lifts for a quarter. He's one of those guys that if things aren't going that well or he's had a down game, he can lift during the game and give you a really good second half performance. So I think he can take it to another level in the back half of the season. I think he's been really good for us this year, and I love Big Sean Darcy getting around too big, too strong. Lloyd Meek. Lloyd Meek's a pretty solid ruckman as well. So when Darcy goes down, we do lose a little bit. I think Darcy's better at getting forward, getting a goal, a bit more physical around the ground. But I think Lloyd Meek is a little bit more mobile, can get to a couple more contest-to-contest type stuff. He's a really solid ruckman. He's probably too good to be a second ruckman. So I wouldn't be surprised in the off-season if clubs try to trade for him, clubs like Geelong, teams that need a ruck. And it's very hard to begrudge a player wanting to get more game time. He's the same age as Sean Darcy. And Sean Darcy's played 70-odd games and Lloyd Meek's played 14 games. So you can understand why Lloyd Meek may want a trade to get a few more opportunities. And it's pretty common for a ruckman to go through many clubs. So, you know, second, third, fourth club. And if he does, I mean, all the best to him. He's been real loyal, and it can be challenging when you're sort of waiting in the wings as the second ring or second rung. We've played 2 rucks a couple of times this year, but I don't think that's been our best setup when we've done that. While we're talking sort of rucks or ruck forwards, so we've got Eric Benning, who we picked up from our NGA. He's very much a project player. He's been playing reserves in Peel. He's got all the attributes from the look of it, and from what I've seen of some little clips and videos. But I think he's only been playing footy for a couple of years, so there's things around like body positioning, just understanding the game, the physicality. He also looked quite skinny, so he's 195 centimetres and 84 kilos according to this. And you compare that to, say, someone like Rory Lobb, 207 centimetres, 106 kilos, so he probably needs to put on about 10 kilos at least. And that, I think he is taller than that 195 that's listed as well. Yeah, so you saw that project player, and I have heard Peter Bell saying a ruck forward is someone we're kind of looking for. I don't think Meek can play a ruck forward role if Rory Lobb leaves, which he may or may not do. We've got a bit of a gap there. Tracy looks more like a forward than he does a ruck. He has rucked a little bit in Peel. So now I'll talk a little bit about the forwards. So Joel Weston. So Joel Weston has had a fairly serious, I think it was hamstring injury, or foot injury. He hasn't played most of the year in the reserves. He played a couple of games last year and looked a little bit off the pace. I think he's someone in that sort of small forward category that can come on a little bit later down the track. And he's still quite young, so plenty of time there to see what he develops into. It's a bit too early to tell. Jai Amos. So Jai Amos has played one game. I'm really happy we finally drafted a key forward in the top 10. He looks like a solid player, very good finisher. His body work looks good in terms of he knows the timing. He just needs to get big, develop a tank, and he can be a very damaging key forward for us over the next decade or so. Very excited to see what he turns into. Mitch Crowden. Crowden's been one of our dominant players down in Peel. It's sort of been between him and Blakely, who's been sort of the best so far this year. I've got a few people sort of saying Crowden's probably ahead of him. He's played midfield, he's played forward. I think in Peel, mostly midfield. When he's played for Freo, he's played that sort of half-forward role. He hasn't got a game this year. He's been... I think he may have been the sub one game, but he's been the emergencies a couple of times. He's one of the guys who's putting up good performances at Peel to try get a game, but he's probably down the pecking order a little bit. He would have played, I think, if there had been more injuries, but our team's been fairly healthy this year. Sam Sturt, someone else who's had quite a few injuries, and it does sometimes look like this year he's just trying to get through the season without getting another major injury. He had someone fall on his knee last year, and he missed a fair chunk of the normal season and parts of the off season. He's one of those guys who's just a dead eye in terms of finishing, but he's not necessarily offering as much when we don't have the ball, and the team seems to have a lot of emphasis on forward pressure and speed. So he's really fast, Sam Sturt, but he's not necessarily chasing people down or putting pressure on them. I think he needs to improve that part of his game before he can look at getting a selection in the senior side at the moment. Michael Walters... he's really had a purple patch in the last 2 months, I'd say. He started the year okay. A couple of people potting him. I was probably a little bit critical at times. He was probably a little bit clumsy with his disposal, or he wasn't as clean as he's been historically. I think some of the knocks that come for Walters is more because of how great of a player he's been. And when people have seen you play at such a high level, that's where the bar gets set in terms of expectations. But he's really starting to come back to that. It's probably a lot more physical ground level pressure than he's probably offered historically. Lots of pressure acts. He's not kicking massive bags like 5 goals or something like that, but he's getting involved in a lot of our scoring output this year. And it's almost been a bit understated how much he's contributed to our scoring. So, been really happy with Sun this year, and he can push on to hopefully 200 games this year and get that milestone. Matt Taberner, it's been a bit of a stop-start year for Matt Taberner. Historically, when he hasn't been in the team, we have struggled to have a bit of forward setup and connection. I think in that St Kilda game where we went down, he wasn't playing that night, and that was probably the most evident game for me where we missed his presence in terms of a tall target to sort of base our team around. The hasn't been missed as much this year because Lob has been quite good, and we've moved Logue up forward as well in recent weeks. It'd be good just to see Tabs get a run at it. He's never played a full season, and he's getting towards sort of the later part of his career now, so it'd be good to just see him have a couple of solid years while we're still developing Jai Amos in the reserves or as sort of a second or third forward with Tabs. Liam Henry, So listed as a forward, I think, in this, but and that's where he's mostly played for Freo. He's playing more of a wing position down at Peel. I think he just needs to find more of the ball. When I've watched Liam Henry, he looks like he's got a bit about him. Quite a classy player, good disposal. But then you just don't see him for 3 quarters. So I just think he needs to find ways to get in the game and stay involved when things aren't necessarily going his way. Lockie Schultz, shooter. Whenever he kicks 2 goals, we win. We've never lost when he's kicked 2 goals. I think the record's 23-0 now. He's a bit of a barometer for the team. It's a bit similar in Hayden Ballantyne. It was very similar if like Ballas kicked 2 or 3 goals. We're like a 95% chance to win the game. And I think it's a bit symptomatic of how well the forward line's performing. If you've got a small forward, those cramming type of small forwards, and he leads up as well pretty well, is if they're getting opportunities and they're kicking goals, it normally means your team's operating quite well. Some of these quieter games, it can be very hard for a small forward if it's like they're not performing that well, they're not running to the right spots, or it's not the tall forwards creating a contest, or the mids aren't kicking it in the right spots. But I think he's been very solid this year, and there's that Melbourne game where he kicked 4 goals. A few of them were set up by some excellent play by others, but there were some pretty ruthless finishes in there. Like he got 4 looks, he kicked 4 goals. That's what you want from your small forwards. Travis Collier. He's had a very solid year. He kind of flies under the radar a little bit, and he's probably one of those guys, I think, he's right on the edge every week, I think, of playing. There are a few people that are trying to push past him, I think, and get in the team, but he keeps rocking up week in, week out. He hasn't got an injury. I think he's played every game so far this year, or almost every game. He's a good link-up player. He runs those channels. He's fast, applies pressure, and he's a fairly decent finisher. But he's not afraid to have a ping every now and then. So, yeah, I've been really happy with Trav's year so far. Josh Tracy, he's played a couple of games in the first this year. He's been a bit underwhelming compared to last year, which has been really tough on a 19-year-old who's playing key position who didn't play any VFL for a year or 2 years. I'm really happy to be patient with Josh Tracy based on what I've seen in terms of last year and his attitude. So he looks like someone who's willing to do the hard yards, put the work in, and transfer that eventually to the AFL. Like, he's still a young guy. Key position players take a lot of time to develop. He doesn't mind the physical stuff, getting tackled, tackling people, getting stuck in. He can probably go a bit overboard at times with his aggression. He's already rubbed himself out a couple of times in some of that physical stuff. And down at Peel, he has won a couple of games where he's just kicked goals in the last quarter. So I think who did we play week just gone? I think we played Swan Districts, but I think before that we played Claremont. There was one game where, or it might have been Subiaco actually. It was Subiaco where Fife came back. He hadn't kicked any goals to half time. I think, and he's kicked 3 goals in the second half, and the team's gotten over by a goal. So he's stepping up in those big moments. I think just when he transfers that to the AFL level, it's holding on to those marks and going back and nailing those opportunities. Rory Lobb is someone that probably cops a bit of flack from the fans in terms of his inconsistency, but I reckon he's been really good this year. Say what you want about previous seasons, but this year been very solid. Been good for 2 goals a game, I think he's averaging, and there's been a couple of bags of 3 and 4. Gives Darcy a bit of a chop out in the ruck, makes a contest. He's someone you can kick to. And he's a hard matchup for the opposition. Like, they've got to respect him and put work into him, which makes it a bit easier for our other forwards. I remember a couple of games where he's really kept us in it. Though. That game against Melbourne, he's the only one that's gone back. He's taken a couple of opportunities. He's floating down back, taking a few chop-out marks as well. So, been really happy with Rory Lobb this year, and he'd be probably in our top 5 in terms of contributions this year, or best and fairest. Yeah, I think our best 5. I should come back to my best 5 at the end. Sam Switkowski, or Swiftkowski as I like to call him. He's been really solid. He's one of those guys that just seems to help create opportunities out of nothing. Fortunately, he's got a back fracture, and he may not play again for the rest of the year. And that's the only, I guess, disappointing thing with Sam is he's got quite a few injuries, or he's a bit injury prone. He's done some hamstrings, and he's now got some. I think the second time he's had a back injury. There's no connection between those injuries, by the way. They're separate incidents, but I've had some previous hamstring injuries and back troubles, and those things are linked to each other. So it could be a bit of a challenge for him just to work through that. He's still relatively young, so if the physio team or the strength and conditioning team can just get on top of it with Sam, there's still a bright future ahead of him. He's a very damaging player as well. Bailey Banfield, so he has been the sort of in and out of the team, playing the sub a lot, and I do feel for him, listening to him talk about, it can be tough in that mindset of not being good enough and being the first player dropped, and you've got to have this irrational belief. And I think if he plays at his best, I've heard a few people talk about this, if he plays at his best, he can play at the level, but he has to play at his best every single week, and that's challenging to do. In the last couple of weeks, he's taken all these opportunities, and while he's in the team, until someone pushes him out of the team, that's all you can do, is just take your opportunities. And it's good to have those players around the fringes who they're getting a bit of exposure. He's still quite young as well, but he doesn't look like he's got that like ceiling that some of the other players have. But you never know. Like, you just got to keep having a crack, and you got to have some of those characters around the team. And a lot of the people seem to like Bailey around the side. He seems to be a pretty honest, upright bloke, and a lot of the team seem to enjoy having him around. Michael Frederick, I think Freddie has had a bit of a breakout year so far. I was a bit disappointed he got done for that drinking incident and didn't get in the team. I was wondering if maybe he would struggle to get back in the side after we beat Hawthorn. I think they were maybe just going to try to find a way to get him back in, but that's where you got to be careful about doing things that get you dropped from a team that's performing well. You can find it hard to get yourself back in, but with Sam Swikowski getting injured, I think he just comes straight back in. I think for Freddie, he's had all the tools at his disposal. I think it's really just been up in his head in terms of, I believe in myself, I belong here. In that game against Melbourne where he ran past the man on the mark and just kicked to that goal, I think that was like, you know what, I'm here, I can play at this level, I can take these people down. And that was an awesome game for him, that Melbourne game, and then he backed it up with a pretty good performance against Brisbane as well. So I want to see him coming out firing against Carlton when he comes back from the bye to make up for lost time. Sabet Kouek, we picked him up in the mid-season draft. Very athletic looking key forward. He's quite undersized in terms of sort of like muscle and weight. He just needs to put on a bit of size and shape, and I think being part of Fremantle's program will help him with that, and he'll come along, and he could be quite a decent player for us. So I'm pretty sure I've gone through everyone on the list now. So I've gone through and I think most players should be pretty happy with their year so far. I think a lot of the guys are really giving it their best, and they're starting to see some reward for their efforts. In terms of who I think are probably in our top 5, it's probably a combination of some of these players. So I'd say Cox, Chapman, Brayshaw, Brody, and Lobb. Yeah, I think that's a fairly fair grouping, I guess, across all the lines. But yeah, so this is my thoughts on how the team are going this year. I've been really happy with the way the team's performed. Let me know who your player that has stood out for you. I've absolutely been loving Fast Freddy. He's quickly turning into one of my favourite players on the team. But yeah, let me know what you think who your favourite player is, or who you've been most impressed with if you're not a Fremantle fan. Drop me a like, and I'll see you all next week. I'll just leave my tips in the little video description. I'm not going through that this week, and I'll be back next week for my review video, or my preview video. We'll be going through the full round again, where we'll be done with the bye rounds and how Freo is going to go up against Carlton. Catch you later, everyone. Bye.